In this video, we will show you how to replace your serpentine belt tensioner on this Toyota Sienna with a 3.5-liter engine. This will be located along the passenger side of your engine. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. Once you make your way under the hood, we're going to start removing the air inlet tube. To remove the air intake tube, you'll find that you have two hoses that make their way down along the side. We'll start up along the top, gently taking hold of them and pulling them free from the area. A quick inspection of each of these as we continue. Slide right out of there. Now if you were to follow this straight down, you have one more mounting point. It looks exactly the same. Continue on to your two 10mm headed mounting bolts that you can see right across the front of the engine compartment. Let's take hold of this. We'll gently start lifting it up, pull it straight forward, and remove it from the engine compartment. Give it a little twist here. A quick inspection and we'll set this aside. The next thing we'll have to do is prepare to drain the coolant. Before you drain your coolant, you want to start up along the top of the radiator here at the radiator cap. Ensure that it's cool to the touch. Once you've done that, we'll carefully press down on this, turn it counterclockwise, and lift it up and away from our face. A quick inspection of the cap to ensure it's still in good working order, and we'll set this aside. Moving just below that area, all the way down at the bottom of the radiator, is where you're going to find the drain. Before you start opening this, make sure you have a collection bucket. Straight underneath this, you can see a port in the lower panel. Turn the drain counterclockwise and let the coolant drain out. We want to make sure we drain out enough coolant that we can remove the upper radiator hose without making a mess. Let's move to disconnecting the upper radiator hose from the radiator. You'll find a clamp that you can squeeze with some pliers or some hose pliers. It's common for these clamps to break. If that's the case, you want to make sure that you replace them with a brand new clamp during the installation process. Now we can remove the hose from the radiator. If it's stuck in place, go ahead and use a hose pick. Be extremely careful not to cause any damage to the rubber hose. Let's work our way around here. Once you have the hose off of there, just give it a quick squeeze. Make sure it's soft and pliable, not torn, worn, or damaged in any way. After that, go ahead and set it aside. Make your way over to the battery. We're going to disconnect the negative battery terminal. Looking in this area, we can see a 10mm headed mounting nut. Go ahead and loosen that, just enough that you can remove the terminal end from the battery. It's pretty rusted. We'll set that aside. Move directly below that area. We're going to disconnect this electrical wiring harness. It has a locking tab over on the driver's side. Squeeze that in, pull this out of place. You can see it right where my thumb is there. A quick inspection for corrosion, of course. If you see any, you need to make sure you take care of that. The next thing we'll do is start dismounting the wiring harness from the fan shroud, which makes its way all the way across towards the driver's side of the vehicle. For this, you can use a trim tool or some pliers, whatever you might happen to have. Just go ahead and pop this right out of place. There's one. Let's move along to the next one here. Now, if you were to keep following this, you're going to find one more mounting point for this wiring harness, just underneath the coolant reservoir. We'll take hold of that wiring harness and set it aside. Move along the bottom center of the fan assembly. You can see that you have a rubber hose that's held in place with a plastic connector. For this, you can use a small screwdriver or an angled pick. Along the bottom backside, there's a small clip that you can generally make your way under, pull that away, and lift this up and out of place. Just a quick inspection of that. That looks good. In the center, we'll remove our overflow hose from the top of the radiator. Once again, a quick squeeze, make sure it's soft and pliable. In the center of the fan assembly here, you're going to find squeezable tabs. We want to squeeze the two of these together, and then we should be able to pull the fan assembly towards the engine. With that separated, let's carefully start pulling this up and out of here, being careful not to cause any damage as we make our way past this center point of the radiator. We'll just give that fan assembly a quick inspection and we can set it aside. Along the top of the engine, we're going to remove the plastic engine cover by lifting straight up on it. With the engine cover removed, we're going to start removing the alternator now. For the alternator, you can see that you have a rubber boot covering this electrical connector. We'll lift that up and out of place. You can see that that exposes a 10mm headed mounting nut. Remove that nut and the wiring harness from the alternator. That looks good. Move from there. Directly towards the passenger side, we'll dislodge this wiring harness as well, using a 10mm. Make our way right down along here, squeeze on this locking tab and pull it out of place. Follow the wiring harness up above the valve cover here. You're going to find that you have a bracket holding the wiring harness in place. We'll use our 10mm to remove the mounting bolt. The next thing we're going to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so we can remove the right front wheel. To remove your right front wheel, you want to remove all 5 of your 21mm lug nuts, and then you can pull the wheel out of place. With the wheel out of the way, we're going to remove this plastic panel. For this, you should have a plastic push clip holding it in the forward corner here. Go ahead and remove that by removing the center first typically, and then it should be unlocked and you can pull the entire portion out. Ours is missing. Moving along from there, you're going to find that you have 2 10mm headed mounting bolts to remove, and then you can remove the panel. Take hold of that panel. Remove the panel from the vehicle. With the shield out of the way, we're going to start removing the serpentine belt from this area. Before you start removing it, pay attention to the orientation of it. The routing will go around some pulleys in one direction and around in others, depending on the pulley itself. And once we do so, you want to have a small bolt or a dowel of some sort. This will go inside of a small slot located on the tensioner itself. Using the 14mm on this, as I mentioned. Now that I have it pivoted, I'm going to install my tool here. Like I said, you can use a bolt or a dowel, whatever you have. Just press that right in there. At this point, we can remove our 14mm from the tensioner. There should be plenty of slack on the belt, and you can pull it out of place as necessary. Make sure we pull it away from that AC compressor. Nice. With the belt out of the way, we're going to have to look deep inside this area right here. You can see a 14mm headed bolt that's holding the lower portion of the alternator in place. We'll go ahead and remove that now. Use our deep 14mm to get up inside this area. Once you do have it broken free, you might have to switch to a shorter socket. Let's pause in the wheel well area and make our way back up into the engine compartment. Let's move that wiring harness aside. We'll pay attention to the upper mounting bolt that holds the alternator in place. For this, once again, we'll be using a 14mm. There we are. It's a tight one. Switch to my ratcheting wrench. Just flex that rubber hose out of the way so we can remove our upper bolt. Now we do have one more hidden bolt. This is a 12mm bolt. If you were to make your way in between this area, along the inboard side of the alternator, that's where you're going to find a small metallic bracket with a 12mm bolt holding it in place. Let's get this on there. See if I can get it on. There we go. There's that bolt. With the mounting hardware that holds the alternator in place out of the way, we're going to continue on by carefully removing the alternator from the area. Something that you need to pay attention to is you do still have your radiator located along the front of the engine compartment. We need to ensure that nothing hits up against that radiator and causes any damage. Just give this a wiggle here. Just gonna have to work this around. Once you pull the alternator away, there's a small bracket that you're going to have to remove by releasing one 12mm headed bolt. You can see the bracket right here? The 12mm headed bolt is right next to the alternator. Put this in here. bracket off of there. We'll reach down in this area and carefully remove the alternator. A quick inspection and we'll set this aside. The next thing we need to do is remove two 12mm headed mounting nuts along the top of the AC compressor. Let's move over towards the passenger side. We've got another 12mm nut. Now we're going to have to use an inverted Torx bit, an E8, to be able to remove this mounting stud, which makes its way through the AC compressor and into the tensioner assembly located behind it. Now let's move down along the bottom of that AC compressor. In this area, you're going to see two 12mm headed mounting bolts holding the AC compressor and the mounting bracket for the wiring harness in place. Go ahead and remove the pair. Let's get that last mounting bolt. When doing this, be careful. You're going to have the weight of the AC compressor pushing down. This bolt out of here. Okay. Take hold of the AC compressor and carefully pull it forward towards the radiator. We want to be extremely careful not to cause any damage to wiring, hoses, or especially that radiator. There we are. Nice. With the AC compressor dislodged, we'll use a small chunk of wood to push it away. At this point, we have a clear view of that serpentine belt tensioner and all 5 of its 14mm headed mounting bolts. You can see one down here on the bottom corner, one over on the other corner. As we make our way up from there, there's a third, a fourth up above your crankshaft position sensor, and the 5th one is located just above that. We'll get that last. Use our 14mm to remove each of these. There's our first bolt. We'll have to clean that up. We'll move along to the next bolt. You can pretty much do these in any order that you like. I'm going to the one that's just above the crankshaft position sensor. There's our next bolt. At this point, you can tell I'm going to have to move that small chunk of wood out of the way so I can gain access to the next 2 down along the bottom, and we'll finish with the upper bolt. It's a little bit out of view. Slide that wood out of the way and gain access to the next two down here. Get it broken free. We can use a smaller ratchet here. There's our third bolt. Let's move just above that to the fourth mounting bolt. For this bolt, we'll go ahead and remove it, a quick inspection, but start it back in just a couple threads. That way there, when we fully remove that last bolt, this will still be held in place. Now as we move up from there, you're going to find the last mounting bolt holding this in place. Once again, we did leave that mounting bolt in down there to hold this so it doesn't fall down while we continue removing this final bolt. Of course, we'll be using our 14mm for this as well. This upper mounting bolt is considerably longer than the others. Quick inspection, set it aside. The next thing we'll do is just go ahead and remove that piece of wood from this area. Remove our final mounting bolt and the tensioner from the engine compartment. There it is, friend. Now we can install our brand new Serpentine belt tensioner. We'll carefully get this in place, starting each of the mounting bolts before tightening any of them, keeping in mind that the upper bolt is the longer of the 5 bolts. Now we'll get this one above the crankshaft position sensor. Make our way directly underneath that one. Once you have them all started in, go ahead and snug them up. The torque for this is 32 foot-pounds. Okay, they're all snug. Now we'll torque them to that 32 foot-pounds as I mentioned. There's that one. Since we're holding the compressor out of the way, we're going to continue going up along the right side mounting bolts here. So we're moving above the crank position sensor next. Let's move up to the next one. Get this last one right here. Now it's time to install the AC compressor. We're going to lift this up, get it in position, and we'll be starting with the two upper mounting studs. Go ahead and start them in by hand, and then we'll be snugging them up with our inverted Torx socket. Just gonna get that through there. Hardest part's getting it lined up and seeing at the same time. There's that one. Let's move along to the next mounting stud up along the top here. Just make sure we bottom these out. Once you do have both of them bottomed out, torque them to 7 foot-pounds. With the upper studs mounted in there, we're going to continue on down along the bottom for the two mounting bolts. For these, we're going to start each of them in, but when we do so, you want to make sure you have your bracket in place as well. That goes along the outboard side of the AC compressor along the front. You can see my bracket right here. Slide it through there, find my bolt in the AC compressor. You may find that you have to wiggle the AC compressor around to get everything aligned properly. There we go. With the lower mounting bolts started in, we'll pause there, make our way up to those upper mounting studs. At this point, we're going to install our mounting nuts up along the top here, start them on, snug them up, torque those to 18 foot-pounds. Now that we've torqued those upper mounting nuts, move down to the lower mounting bolts. Snug them up, torque those to 18 foot-pounds as well. Now we'll torque these to 18 foot-pounds. Now it's time to install the alternator. Before we install it, there's one thing I want to mention about this. As for the upper mounting point, where you had the mounting bolt that goes through, the area that it screws into is actually a metal bushing. You want to go ahead and tap on the inboard side here and drive it out and away, creating a larger space here, so when we go to install this, you'll be able to put it in position easier. Now let's carefully bring this alternator down and into position. We want to be extremely careful around the radiator. Once you have it rested down here, we're going to continue on with our dipstick tube. You can see that you have a 12mm headed bolt holding this to the engine. We want to go ahead and remove the bolt so we can dislodge the tube, move it around so we can gain access to the bracket that goes along the back of the alternator. At this point, you should be able to flex that dipstick tube. We do not want to cause any damage to it. With the alternator resting down in this position, we're going to continue on with the bracket. To more easily install the bracket, we're going to install the 12mm headed bolt that holds the bracket to the engine block, but keep it loose. I want to be careful not to drop this bolt. Just gonna get it through the bracket. Okay, we're through the bracket now. Try to get this started into the engine. There we are. Like I said, we are not going to tighten this yet. Just going to get it so it's bottomed out here, but a little loose. While having that bracket mounted to the engine loosely, we can continue on with the alternator. We'll carefully start putting this in place. I have to try to get that ear in between the bracket we mounted to the engine and the mounting bracket that's part of the engine here. Should slide right in between there. We'll align the upper ear. Let's get this upper mounting bolt in place for the alternator. That's the longer of the two alternator bolts. Start that in by hand, leave it loose. Once again, we want to line up that lower portion of the alternator with the bracket after this. Now it's time for that lower bolt, which is the shorter of the two, of course. Make our way down under here. Not much space. Now that we've got the lower bolt for the alternator in place, we can continue on to snugging and torquing each of these. With it snug, we'll torque it to 32 foot-pounds and then do the same to the lower mounting bolt. Now we can get that bracket bolt in that goes to the alternator. It's a little bit hard to reach. We're just going to try to get it right in there, start it in by hand. Try getting this in here while it's attached to a socket. Just flex that dipstick out of the way. We'll start this in by hand. With both of those started in, we can snug them up. We'll start with the one into the engine block. There's that. To re-secure our dipstick tube, we have our 12mm headed mounting bolt. You know what to do, start it in, snug it up. Moving from there, we'll continue on with securing our wiring harness. Up along the top of the valve cover here, we need to install a 10mm headed mounting bolt. Let's go ahead and start that right in there. Right there is bottomed out. Just make sure it's snug. Follow this down to where it connects onto the alternator. See the bracket right down here. Okay, it's bottomed out. Make sure it's nice and snug. Move along to your electrical connectors. Start with the bottom one here. Just press it in, listen for a nice click. I get a click from that. A little tug, make sure it's properly secured. We'll continue on with our power wire for the alternator. Go ahead and take that, get it in position, and start on your mounting nut. Get our 10mm nut on there. You want to make sure you have good contact here. We'll make sure we put on our protective boot so nothing arcs out against this area. Slides right over it. Make sure that's completely covered. Let's pause in the engine compartment, make our way back into the wheel well so we can reattach our serpentine belt. As I mentioned during the removal process, it has a specific routing. You want to make sure you have it in the same orientation. Get it around most of the pulleys here so it's pretty much ready. Yeah, looks pretty good. Serpentine belt tool. You can also use a 14mm wrench if necessary. Be careful for any pinch points in case your tool slips off here. We don't want anybody getting hurt. Now, when you're installing the belt, it's important to pay attention to the fact that it needs to sit on each one of the grooves properly. As you can tell, this is not sitting properly on this. If we were to leave it like this, the belt could potentially come off or get damaged when the vehicle's running. It's important to make sure you confirm that it's properly seated on each and every one of the pulleys. Just do that before I remove my tool here. I can see it making its way around the crank pulley here, making its way down along the bottom of the AC compressor, all the way up to the alternator, underneath the idler pulley, up and over the water pump pulley, and then around that tensioner leading back down to the crank. This looks perfect. Let's install our plastic shield. We'll start with our two 10mm headed bolts, start them in, leave them loose, and then install your plastic push clip. After that, tighten the bolts. Lock that in. With that plate installed, it's time to install our wheel. Start on all 5 of your 21mm lug nuts. Bottom them out, we'll get the wheel back on the ground and we can torque each of these to 76 foot-pounds. With the wheel safely on the ground, we'll torque these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Back in the engine compartment, we need to make our way to the bottom of the radiator. We had loosened the drain. You want to make sure that you tighten that up and make sure there's going to be no leaks from this area. We'll just wipe it down to confirm that it's nice and dry. Looks good. With the drain of the radiator tight, looking down along the radiator, you can see that you have 3 of these slotted tabs on the bottom of the radiator for the fan to slide down and into. Looking along the bottom of the fan, you can see those 3 locating tabs. Carefully start putting this in place, being extremely careful for the radiator. We don't want to cause any damage, as I've already previously mentioned. Flex this a little bit. There we are. Once you have the bottom in, go ahead and press the top in towards the radiator. In the top center, you're going to have those 2 locking tabs that we had to squeeze to be able to remove the fan. This time we're just pressing the fan over it. Holding it in position, we'll continue on with our two 10mm headed bolts holding the fan up against the radiator. Get this one in here. Snug them up. Double check to make sure your fan's completely secured to the radiator. Reconnect your coolant overflow hose to the top of the radiator. Double check to make sure that's secured. If it's loose and wants to fall off, go ahead and hold it on here with a wire tie of some sort. Now we'll move along to our wiring harness. We'll secure it to the fan assembly. We have 3 locking tabs here. Press it in, double check to make sure it's secured as you continue along. This one right here, the fan actually broke a little bit, so I'll be using a wire tie to hold it in position. You want to make sure it is properly secured. We don't want it getting caught on anything. There we are. Now we can reconnect our electrical connector. We'll line this up with the locking tab facing towards the driver's side of the vehicle. Press it in, listen for a click. Give it a tug to make sure that's properly secured. Time to reconnect the upper radiator hose. We'll take this and slide it up against the radiator as far as possible. Once you've done that, you want to reattach your clamp and make sure it's properly secured so you do not have a coolant leak from this area. During the removal process, I had to break the clamp. I'm going to replace it with a brand new band clamp. Once again, we're just making sure that's nice and tight. Now we can install our air inlet tube. Align your 2 mounting bolt holes across the front. Install your 2 10mm headed mounting bolts. Let's attach the hoses along the side there. We're going to have to reach down along the side of the battery. We'll press them right into their position. Make our way up here. Our next mounting point, right there. Double check to make sure they're completely secured. Make your way over to your negative battery terminal. Press that onto the battery as far as possible. We'll tighten that nut with a 10mm. Now it's time for the engine cover. Along the top of the engine, you're going to find that you have 4 tabs for that cover to place down onto. Once it's in position, go ahead and press it straight down. Double check to make sure that's properly secure. Now it's time to fill the cooling system. We're going to fill it with the manufacturer's specified coolant. I'll be using a coolant funnel. Once we do have this topped off, we're going to have to start up the vehicle, let it run for approximately 5 seconds, and turn it right back off. Go have a quick look at that belt. Ensure that it's sitting on all the pulleys properly. After that, continue on to starting up the vehicle and let it run to get up to normal operating temperature. As we're doing this, you're going to find that you have air bubbles making their way up and out of the system, and coolant will make its way down, so continuously check that funnel to keep topping it off. After you've run the vehicle for a while and you hear your coolant fans turn on, go ahead and turn off the vehicle, check that coolant level one last time, and then reinstall your coolant cap. Let's get this cap on here. Turn that clockwise until it stops. At this point, we've already run the vehicle and we've confirmed everything functions properly. Go ahead and close the hood and take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.